Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today we are going to look at the Nakhmanson Gambit. It's a pretty crazy opening, but I'm going to cover it as a part of the Gambit series, and starting to research it, I realized that it's not as crazy as it may seem. So is the position you can see on the board. It has been played a couple of times by very strong players, and there have been some wins against very strong players, even in tournament games. And the position you can see on the board can be reached several different ways. It's technically a part of the Scotch Gambit. So if we start with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, we can reach the same position either with bishop c4, the Italian, or d4, the Scotch, going into the Scotch Gambit. I've created the Nakhmanson Gambit repertoire on Nocti, and you can practice it against Nocti now. The interesting thing about relatively unsound gambits is that if you play them against an engine, you are just gonna lose, let's be honest. And if you play them against a human, well, humans could make mistakes. So the reason Nocti is great is because it's as if you were playing a human that doesn't play perfectly. So Nocti is gonna keep making human-like mistakes. Now let's see what it does. Okay, it takes. Nice. Let's play bishop takes f7. Plays king e7? Well, that doesn't work. Now Nocti is just losing. Okay, the bishop should be taken. You're going to see what happens in the video. So Nocti is going to make mistakes a human would make. So in the absence of a human willing to practice the Nakhmanson Gambit against you, you can use Nocti. It's going to make mistakes like a human, try to trick you like a human. You can obviously select the difficulty. If you select the highest difficulty, you are going to lose. But yeah, that's what can you do? That's like you were playing a FIDE master or above. So follow the link below in the description and you will get to the Nakhmanson Gambit repertoire. If you decide to unlock all of Nocti's premium features, use the code Hanging Pawns to get a massive 64% discount. For this video, let's just enter it via the Italian. So after bishop c4, knight f6, white plays d4. And d4 is one of the moves. It's fine, it's not the main move. After ed4, we are now in the Scotch Gambit, and after white castles, black takes the pawn on e4, although there are other moves, albeit rarely played. And here the main move for white by far is rook e1. It's the only move played in tournament games by grandmasters, and if you buy any book on the Scotch or anything, rook e1 is heavily analyzed, everything is known about it, and your opponent is going to expect rook e1. However, knight c3, the Nakhmanson Gambit, is incredibly wild. Now I'm going to show you ways for white to win if black blunders, ways for black to win if they play perfectly. So the Nakhmanson Gambit technically gives black a minus 0.9 advantage if it's accepted, if the knight is taken, and that is the best move. If the knight isn't taken, the position is relatively equal. Black should be slightly better with two alternatives to taking the knight. Let's get them out of the way first. So firstly, you can take with the knight, not winning a piece. And after bc3, bishop e7, black should have a very comfortable advantage, because after cd4, there is d5, and after bishop b5, black just castles, and in this position, obviously, white is down a pawn for no good reason. So if black wishes to avoid all the complications of the accepted Nakhmanson Gambit, black can just take the knight with the knight, and on bc3, play bishop e7 and castle quickly. Now, if white doesn't take on d4, then, white is 2 pawns down, and on d5, bishop b5 is the most sensible move. Castle something like rook e1 and bishop b4, and you can see why black has an advantage. So if I were black, since the engine evaluation between taking with the pawn and accepting the gambit and taking with the knight and just being up a pawn is about minus 0.3, well, then I would take with the knight, because I still have a better position, I'm up a healthy pawn, and I cannot really blunder the same way I can blunder if I accept the piece. The second alternative to taking is playing d5 straight away, and this should be roughly equal. White should take with the bishop, dc3, bishop e4, queen d1, rook d1, bishop d7, and black just has a slightly better pawn structure. So d5 isn't a move you should consider, in my opinion. Now let's get to the actual Nakhmanson Gambit. I expect most people who don't know the variation would take the piece, because it's clear that queen d5 doesn't work. So usually the idea in these positions, when there's a queen that's able to come to d5 and the knight on e4, is to double attack the knight and the pawn on f7 with queen d5. That simply doesn't work. If you play queen d5 here, then knight d6 saves the knight, defends f7, attacks the bishop, and white is busted. So if I didn't know the position, I would probably take on c3, because I don't really see the point. I don't see the refutation. However, the point isn't to play queen d5. The point is to take on f7. And this is the only good move, and it's actually very complex. So the bishop must be taken. If king e7, then white is completely winning after bishop d5, because now the knight is hanging. If the knight moves away somewhere, I don't know where, say knight f6, then rook e1 is actually mate. King d6 is the only move, and now you can play a discovered check anywhere. For example, bishop f7, king c5 only move, bishop e3 check, and so on. Eventually, the king is getting mated. So on bishop takes f7, the bishop must be taken. King takes f7. And now we play queen d5, because it's check. Okay, the knight is attacked, the king is in check. Most importantly, the king cannot go out to g8, cannot hide. There are only two moves worth analyzing, and that's king e8 and king f6. If the king goes to e7, that loses immediately to queen takes e4, king f7, knight g5 check, and that's going to be mate. King g8, queen d5 mate, king f6 is also mate. Let me show you that, let me figure it out. King f6, queen f4 check. Okay, on king e7 we have rook e1, on king g6 queen f7, king h6 g4, now threatening queen h5. So yeah, g6, knight e6 followed by queen h5, that works. g5, queen h5. Okay, so king e7 loses straight away. So there are two moves. The only move that has been played between serious players is king e8, and king e8 is a mistake. And you can expect most people to play king e8 because playing king f6 seems suicidal. Now, other than getting mated, one of the main ideas white has is to take the knight and play bishop g5 check if the king is on f6, picking up the queen. So there's definitely something you have to worry about. However, king f6 is still the best move, and I'm going to show you how to survive the attack. Before we get into that, let's just go over king e8, because that's what most people would play. Now, against this, we don't play queen e4. Queen e4 check is losing straight away. It's a very tempting check. You pick up a piece with check. However, after queen e4 check, bishop e7, black is completely winning. Completely winning. Something like rook e1, d5, the queen gets chased away, I don't know, queen d3, king f7 or king f8, the rook is coming into the game, there are no more checks, black is simply up a piece, and there's nothing here. So not queen e4. The main idea is rook e1, and what white is trying to do, now that the knight is pinned, is a combination of bishop g5, the rook taking on e4, the other rook coming to e1 and overwhelming black down the e file. So, after rook e1, the position is actually equal. Black has messed up. King e8 had been a mistake. There are three ways for black to play this. You cannot defend the knight. There's nothing you can do to defend the knight. You have to cover the e file. And the best move is incredibly counterintuitive. The other two moves actually give white an advantage. One tempting move is knight e7, and that's just better for white, but in practical play probably busted for black. Now rook e4, the knight is still pinned. I don't know, c6, chasing the queen away, queen h5 check, g6, queen e5, rook g8, bishop g5, and once the rook comes to e1, you will have a very hard time surviving this. That being said, the engine says 0 if you play perfectly, losing if you mess up. d5 is the only move that keeps the equality or relative equality. So not knight e7. What about bishop e7? Bishop e7 is also equal. We take on e4, once again pinning the bishop, and the point behind bishop e7 is king f8. And now, if white wishes to have a small edge, they should play b4, which is a crazy move. Now, this can be taken two different ways. If knight takes pawn, then rook f4 check, that's the point. Bishop f6 blocking the check, and bishop a3. If you're going to play the Nakhmanson Gambit, you simply have to know this line. If you want to be equal after rook e1 and bishop e7, then you have to know this trick. Rook e4, king f8, b4, knight b4, rook f4, bishop f6, and bishop a3. The idea behind b4 was to give the bishop the a3 square if the pawn is taken. But the best move for black is absolutely crazy. The best move for black is queen f6. Giving the king a square on d8, giving the bishop a way to shelter the king without blocking in the queen, and actually threatening to take on b2. This takes a lot of courage. Now, white can lose in a single move. Rook e4 loses straight away. Rook e4, bishop e7, black is up a piece, remember, and b2 is hanging. If you play bishop g5, then queen f7 offers a queen trade, and there's nothing else you can do. The bishop is defended by the knight. So on queen f6, white must play queen e4 check. Once again, bishop e7, bishop g5, attacking the queen, attacking the bishop, queen f7, and now the only way to stay equal for white is an incredibly powerful combination of moves, starting with knight e5. Now, this knight cannot be taken. If the knight's taken, then after queen e5 the bishop is hanging. So no debate there. We're just gonna move, take the bishop. Once the queen takes, move our queen, take on c3 for example, and the queen is hanging. So knight e5, the queen must move away, and it has to keep defending the bishop because it moves. If it moves too far away, I don't know, to g8, then we take on c6 and the bishop is hanging with mate. So queen e6, only move. Okay, now after queen e6, we can take on c6, and the knight is immune. Why is the knight immune? Well, if you play dc6, then queen e6, the queen is hanging. Once the bishop takes, we recapture with the rook. The bishop on e7 cannot be defended. And on bc6, we just win with queen d4. The queen is attacked, it's hanging. The bishop is attacked, it's hanging. Once the queen moves away, we take the bishop, we check, we win the game. So knight c6, black only has one move. I mean, this is why the Nakhmanson Gambit is incredibly tricky. And once again, all of these moves are in the Nocti repertoire. And, you know, if you want to learn it, play it out against Nocti. I'll also drop a PGN of all of this below. So cb2, that's the move. And now white must defend. You cannot just, you know, lose your rook. Now queen takes e4, rook takes e4. If on knight c6 you play queen takes e4, then on rook e4 you are losing because there's nothing you can do to defend your bishop. And you haven't sorted out the b2 pawns. Rook ab1, queen e4, rook e4, bc6, rook e7, king f8, and rook e3, and this should be equal, and it's clear why. I mean, technically black is up a pawn, but that pawn is going away, and black's king is going to be misplaced, and the extra pawn that's going to remain is the double c pawn. So this should be roughly equal. So that's king f8. Oh, sorry, king e8. So on queen d5, king e8 is actually a mistake for black. The best black can hope for, if white knows these lines, is going to be a draw. So now let's look at the best move. The best move is king f6. And I wouldn't play this in a million years if I didn't know exactly what I was doing. Okay, so white once again continues with rook e1. That is the only move. On queen e4, white is losing due to bishop e7, and once bishop e7 is played, bishop g5 no longer wins the queen, because the bishop is in between the king and the queen. So that's one of the main patterns for black to survive. The bishop will come to e7, preventing bishop g5 from winning the queen. Okay, rook e1. Now, black has only one move to survive. Only one move to survive, and that's knight e7. Despite this being the absolute best for black, the Nakhmanson Gambit is very powerful precisely because black has to make a series of only moves, and white's only moves are, relatively simple to play. Let me just show you what happens on bishop e7, which is a normal move. We play rook e4. And now what do? Let's say you play d6, rook f4, king g6, queen f7, and that's going to be mate in 1, king h6, rook h4 mate. That's it. It's a discovered attack by the bishop. So on rook e1, bishop e7 is losing. What else? If you play d6 straight away, then once again rook e4, and your king is caught in a mating net. So on rook e1, black must play knight e7. Black must play knight e7. Now your queen is attacked, so you don't have time for rook e4. And what's the benefit of knight e7? Well, it temporarily gives black time to run away to f7. So the king has vacated the e7 square, the e-file, excuse me, and plans to come back to f7. So queen takes e4, the only sensible move. Black must play king f7. If black doesn't play king f7, let's just say d6, then queen f4 prevents the king from running away. If you play knight f5, then you lose straight away to queen g5, I pick up your queen. So you must play bishop b5. It's the only move. And after bishop b5, bishop f5, I just pick up your bishop. Okay, so on rook e1, knight e7, queen e4, king f7 is the only move. And after king f7, white plays bishop g5, increasing their pressure on e7. Black snatches this pawn, rook ab1 is forced, and now black is close to winning after d5. This is the end of the line. If you play the Nakhmanson Gambit and you get this position, you are going to lose because black knows everything. And this is the absolute best black can do. So say queen f4 check, the king is running away to g8. We no longer have a light squared bishop. We took on f7. I don't know, queen e5 is the engine move, h6, and the king now has multiple squares. We are going to pick up this bishop, but it doesn't really matter. Now, black shouldn't trade queens, allowing the rook to the second rank. Black should simply play king h7, and black is winning. We won back our pieces, technically, but look at the pawn situation. In this case, let's say, I don't know, rook takes b2, b6, the bishop's coming to b7. Black is up a pawn with a very comfortable position and with a monstrous bishop. This is -1, absolutely zero compensation for the pawn. So that's the Nakhmanson Gambit. If you want to play this position, I would recommend that you only do it in online games until you get really comfortable with it. I'm gonna tell you the score on Lichess. After dc3, white wins 61% of the games. 61. That's huge. And that means that the Gambit is difficult to play against. I hope you like this. I'm going to be continuing the Gambit series in the future. Let me know what you think and stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.